Hey folks, we're about to start another episode of Ask Us Anything about electrochemistry. But before we begin, because we have some extra time, there are a few things I'd like to go over first. While we're waiting for the live stream to start, type your question into the chat. The sooner we get your question, the sooner we'll be able to answer it when the live stream starts. We usually try to answer questions in the order that we receive them, but it's definitely possible that we get so many questions that when your question comes up, we're out of time. If you are a Tier 1 or a Tier 2 YouTube member, you do get priority in us answering your question. You also have the opportunity to join us on the stream to either share slides or talk to us in person about your specific electrochemistry research questions. If you are a Tier 1 or Tier 2 member on our YouTube channel, you will find in the community post the link and password to join us on our broadcasting platform. We get a lot of questions about electrochemistry, whether it's through our YouTube comments, webinars, email, phone conversations. We get lots of questions from people about electrochemistry. And sometimes responding to a YouTube comment or trying to describe a cyclic voltammogram over the phone isn't always the easiest way to teach or describe electrochemistry. That's why we created this live stream. In the Ask Us Anything About Electrochemistry live stream, you can ask us any questions you have about electrochemistry, and we can use better tools and take more time to describe some of these electrochemical processes to help you with your research and understanding of electrochemistry. Now, in our time of doing this live stream, we've observed that if you ask a very, very specific question, we might not be able to answer it. It'll be a little bit too specific for us. On the other side, if you ask a very broad question and you're interested in just a very broad understanding of cyclic voltammetry, we have separate tools, we have other resources to help you. So we do have a YouTube video on cyclic voltammetry, an introduction to the subject. And if you're interested in more of a long-form course on, say, electrochemical impedance spectroscopy, we have a 5-part EIS webinar series for our Tier 2 YouTube members that you can access at any time. Now, if you weren't aware, Pine Research Instrumentation is a company that produces a wide array of high-quality electrochemical research equipment, from potentiostats to electrodes, electrochemical rotators, cells, different types of accessories. Pine Research has been supporting electrochemistry research and teaching for decades. Recently, we have developed new electrochemical simulation software called Aftermath Live. Aftermath Live is an online streaming platform where you can simulate popular electrochemical techniques like cyclic voltammetry. It's a powerful research tool, as you might simulate a cyclic voltammogram to support an electrochemical mechanism for your redox reaction that you're studying. But Aftermath Live and cyclic voltammetry simulation is also a very powerful tool when it comes to just learning electrochemistry. In fact, in previous episodes of the live stream, we have used Aftermath Live and our simulation software to answer some of the questions that you have. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can get a 10% discount on your first month of the basic and research editions of Aftermath Live by using the coupon code PINEYouTube10 when you're at checkout. Aftermath Live is a powerful tool and you can cancel your subscription at any time. Go to aftermathlive.com to check it out. Link is in the description below. Our live streams are normally on Fridays from 1 to 3 p.m. They normally last about 2 hours, sometimes a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less. If you miss the live stream, you'll always be able to watch it on our YouTube channel, and in the description we put timestamps for every question that was asked. This way you can look through the description and find the questions that are most relevant to your research and then watch those at your leisure. Also, we apologize in advance if we mispronounce your name. If on a YouTube channel you can put anything you want as a name. It could be a Pokemon, it could be a string of numbers. But if we call you out and we accidentally mispronounce your name, we apologize in advance. Lastly, please do not spam the chat. We've had numerous instances of people either talking about inappropriate things or constantly filling the chat up with some kind of spam. We will remove you if you do that. Let's keep the chat very clean and just talk about electrochemistry. Sometimes it takes a while before we're able to answer your question. So if you keep typing your question into the chat and spam the chat, then we will remove you from the chat. But if it's been a while and we may have forgotten about your question, one message as a gentle reminder is all that's required. All right, I think that's all of the housekeeping things. Now, let's start the live stream. All right, hello everybody.
Hello, we are here. We're 24 hours early, but we're here.
That's right, a whole 24 hours.
24 whole hours early. We're normally here on Fridays, but today is not Friday unless you are, I guess, in like, is it Friday in Japan yet? It might be.
It is the future by 12 hours,
Yeah.
so it's 1 in the morning, maybe in Japan.
So like Australia and Japan, it is Friday.
It is Friday for you.
But otherwise, it is Thursday. And welcome, everybody.
Yes, we're changing up the time that we do it just for now because scheduling issues, and there were some questions that people had asked in previous live streams that we weren't able to get to, so we wanted to take a little bit of extra time, not fall behind on these live streams. And so Neil, you'll take us away with some questions.
I will. So this was one from Claire M22. There was some questions, I believe. There were some emails or those comments, and maybe there was a previous live stream where either you or I can't even remember. It's been some weeks now. And part of it is because, as I apologized before, I had meant to answer this last week and we had a lot of questions and we just didn't get to it, which we very much appreciate. Thank you everybody for joining us live. If you're asking questions now, we will get to them. But I need to answer this question first because I had promised last week I would, and I did not do so. So Claire had a question about IR compensation. Essentially, should you do it during the experiment or after the experiment, and what's the difference? And so just talking about IR compensation. So I'm going to spend a few minutes and kind of go over IR compensation, I guess you'd say in general, and how to do it, and whether before or after matters or makes a difference. So I have a few slides to kind of go through here. So IR compensation is a way to measure the distance, IR compensation is a way to account for the resistance that exists between the working and reference electrodes. Okay, there's typically it happens because you have an electrolyte concentration that's really small, or your working and reference electrodes are really far away from each other. That can lead to those kinds of things. I'm not talking as much now about the circuitry or how a potentiostat operates. That I can talk about those things, but those are a little bit of a separate topic here. I want to just kind of show how to do it and why, for example, it is often better if you can to compensate during the experiment rather than afterwards. Okay. And mainly the reason is this last point here is because you can get a distorted waveform if you compensate afterwards. Okay. So let's just consider a simple CV, right? 100 millivolts per second. This is the waveform. This is not the CV, right? The CV will have peaks or whatever, like a normal CV, but this is what the waveform looks like. I started at minus 0.2 volts. I scan at 100 millivolts per second. So over the x-axis here is time. And you can see I scan up to, I guess, 0.7, and then I scan back to minus 0.2. So this is the waveform. And this is what is a CV is sort of definitionally has to be. It's that the scan rate is at a constant sweep rate. So if you're doing things like the Randall-Sevchik equation or other kinds of analyses, they often require you to know the sweep rate or the scan rate, and that figures into the calculation. So what it kind of means, and that you probably have never thought about before if you are perhaps doing this sort of calculation with IR compensation, is that the scan rate must be constant. It must be, and that's almost never, that's always, I mean, I'd say it seems like it's probably always taken for granted. Like you tell the potentiostat to sweep 100 millivolts per second, and that's what it does. So you can use 100 millivolts per second in your calculations. But the reality is that that may not always be accurate because of the IR drop. And so here is just the current overlay for this particular sweep. Great. I have a nice looking CV. Everything is all happy, right? All right. Now, the critical thing here when it comes to the IR drop and IR compensation is what potential did the working electrode actually experience? So as one example here, if I measured 6 kilo ohms of resistance, right? This is a very, very high resistance. So not many cases have a resistance that high, but let's just take this extreme example. Well, IR drop is just what it looks like. IR, it comes from Ohm's law, right? V is equal to IR. And so what that actually means practically is that the voltage, V, that is experienced by the working electrode is what the potentiostat applied minus the I times R, or the current times the resistance. And so what it actually experienced will be different if you have a lot of I or a lot of R, right? Now, in this particular example, at this 0.4 volts on the green curve, the corresponding current that was measured was 27 microamps. And my RU was measured to be 6 kilo ohms. Well, 27 microamps times 6 kilo ohms is about 160 millivolts. So while the potentiostat and the software showed me 0.4 volts, the actual potential at my working electrode was 0.4 minus 0.16, which is 0.24. So the actual or experienced potential was not what I wanted it to be because of this. This is an extreme example, again, with an IR drop that's very resistance that's very high. And so what I can do is I can correct each point, the IR, and take away, as the case may be, what the actual experienced potential. So that's what this purple curve is here that I've overlaid, right? And you can see the green curve is the one that I tried to do, but the purple or blue, whatever color this is to your eyes, curve is not constant. You know, it's pretty constant here, but then it gets, the slope is smaller and then it's bigger, and it doesn't even get to the vertex that I'm trying to get to. And it's not constant. So the reality is that the IR drop is changing the experienced potential because let's say the R is constant, but the current, the I is changing, the red curve, because that's what happens when you do cyclic voltammetry. You change the potential and there's a resultant current. And so as the current gets bigger, the amount of loss of IR drop also gets bigger. So the effect is that the potential is not sweeping at the rate that you think it is. So that's a problem, right? Now, you can correct manually after the fact, or you can have it corrected during the experiment. Those are the two options. So the problem with correcting after the fact is that you will remain with the purple or blue curve here. That is what actually happened in this case, right? I did a sweep. I told it to do 100 millivolts per second. I got these curves. I can correct the potential axis to know what the actual potential was and have a sort of IR corrected V versus I, and like do an IR corrected CV. But the reality is that the sweep rate was not constant. So when I have a sizable resistance or a sizable IR drop, I can get an IR corrected CV by correcting after the fact. The problem is the sweep rate is not constant. So if all you're doing is showing the CV, maybe that's okay. But if you're doing calculations, it's probably introducing some error because you are assuming the sweep rate was constant and it was not. So the other option is that we add, you can think about it like add the difference of these two ahead of time. And so if I apply this unstable kind of curve to the potentiostat, and then I subtract at every point to get what the experience potential is, I will get the blue curve now that is what I want. So this is the difference between doing an IR correction, IR compensation during the experiment, is that you're telling the potentiostat, instead of losing the potential at every point, add it as I go, so that when it gets lost, it loses the potential like down to what I'm after. And so the result, the expected result, will be a perfect CV basically at a set sweep rate. So this is what the IR compensation during an experiment is giving you. And that is better because you'll have an IR corrected CV, but it's also at the sweep rate that you've determined. So calculations will be more accurate. And so I'll show you this as the last thing I do with this. Is here's the examples of the blue curve is not IR corrected. You see that it's very elongated, and the peaks have a high separation. And then when you do IR correction, they line up more closer to 60 millivolts split, essentially. Okay, I'm going to show you some example of that now. For instance, so here is a CV that looks great. This is a ferrocene, I think, CV that I took some time ago, I suppose. And so this looks very, very nice, right? No IR drop problem, basically. Okay. Now here's one that is not nice. Looks pretty elongated. And so I have you can see I have 1 millimolar TBAPF6. It's like very low electrolyte concentration on purpose to try to illustrate this point, right? And so what I'll do is I'll take this waveform. I'm going to get all the raw data out here, right? So let's just delete so this is time. I think this is potential. Okay. And let me go back to the software, and then I'll get the current. So this is the current response. We put this in here. I'm just getting the raw data for now. I think I have one extra point here. No, it's fine. Yeah. Why isn't it lining up? Sorry about that. I might have copied too many things. I'm not sure what I did here.
Yeah, because those are it should be, unless maybe it's like one segment or
yeah,
two segments.
I gotta figure out what I copied properly. But give me a moment here.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
I want to do the calculations here properly.
Ultimately, what you're trying to do is you're trying to get the excitation waveform, the potential versus time, then line it up with the measured current versus time. Yeah. The time should be the same on both ends, and then you'll know the solution resistance value. You'll multiply it by the current, and that will give you a potential. And then you'll be able to add or subtract. I think in this case you will subtract
this is fine.
the potential.
Somehow I've been using this data set forever, and I think probably what happened was that I've manipulated those plots before, and that's not the right data anymore. Just I've had it forever. So these are in millivolts. All right. Yeah. So here's the raw data. This is the time, current, and potential data. So let's just get these in SI units. I'm just going to do that. So this is volts. I don't like to have, I like to have SI units, volts, right? And these are in microamps. So let's do that. Let's get these in amps. Let's just do that really quickly. All right. Now we've got our data. So current and potential in volts. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do V minus IR column. And my R, I'm just writing this for our visual purposes. The resistance is 6,000 ohms. So if I do equals V minus I times 6,000, at all points, I'm correcting the voltage, right, for the amount of IR drop. So you can see that when the current here is very, very small, this is like the beginning of the current is very small, my voltage that I measured was 0.199. The corrected is 0.1. It's almost the same. It's not that different. So you can just even look down the column and start to see when the current starts to get larger, 10 to the minus 6. Now I have 144 and 160. Like it's starting to be different, right? So when the current gets larger, the difference in these columns starts to be much more noticeable, especially down here and things like that. Okay. So what I'll do is just make a couple of plots to illustrate that, the point that I made previously, right? So if I show, for instance, time, that's the x-axis, yeah, okay. So if I show time, sorry, just making sure I was doing the right axis here. And I do the potential, the non-corrected potential. Well, that's what it was supposed to be, right? Look, perfect sweep. That's what I sort of told the potentiostat to do. And this is just recreating what I showed on my slides, but I'm just showing it in real time here. But this is what the IR corrected voltages actually are. So there you can see when I correct it, that's the plot I showed on my, but I'm just showing you how I calculated that directly. So that's actually what happened. Now, that's bad again because I'm not doing the right sweep rate that I want to do. But what you can see is, again, if you don't need a calculation that involves the scan rate being like correct, I suppose, you can look at the correction, for example. So this would be x-axis would be the voltage. So this is the original non-IR corrected CV. And you see that it's pretty bad separation, and there's the effective IR compensation is there. So when I add the IR corrected one after the fact, so the same current, but the IR corrected voltage, you see that it does look better. Okay. So the orange curve, I've effectively have brought the peaks, there's closer to maybe, closer to 60 millivolt separation. And so it is IR corrected, but it's not the same because the IR corrected, which I'll come back to our software, it's the last thing that I'll show here, is that this is what the IR corrected now looks similar. This right here looks similar to this orange data here. They're both IR corrected. But the difference is that this one was done with the software correcting automatically, so that this is both IR corrected CV and the sweep is what it was supposed to be. Right, the sweep ended up being the software doesn't show you the wrong potential, so it looks right. But this is actually what the potential working electrode experience was, the proper sweep rate. So if your IR drop is large and you need quantitative information, it's better to try to do IR compensation during the experiment if your potentiostat and software allows it. So that is hopefully a quick but complete explanation of IR compensation, both afterwards and during. So Claire, if you do see this, hopefully, I apologize for not getting to it for an extra week, but I hope that is clear for you. And then we'll move on now. So there we go. I've finally gotten to that I meant to get to last week.
Okay.
Okay.
And did you want to do the other prelims, or do you want to talk about some of the questions that we have active in the chat?
Let's get to the active chat, but I think this one, if you want to talk about this, is Lino.
This just came in?
Well, no, Lino, this one was actually chronologically first. So this person asked the question in the chat before our live stream started. So you can talk about this.
What is the insulating layer in SPE, and what happens if you do not put one on it? So it depends on which SPE you have, but generally speaking, and I guess I'll just draw. I'll draw a picture of it. Well, actually, no, I don't have to draw a picture. We have pictures on the internet of our screen printed electrodes.
You think the internet can draw better than you?
It absolutely can.
I don't think
draw
that's true.
Better than me. But let's just go to. Let's see if I share this screen. Let's see. All right, and then carbon screen. Okay, all right. So these are screen printed electrodes from Pine. These are our carbon screen printed electrodes, but most screen printed electrodes have this kind of design. Generally speaking, you have the contacts on the end here. This is where the potentiostat or the grip mount cell cable leads would connect to. And then you would have a counter electrode here. You would have a working electrode here, this little dot. And then you have an even smaller little gray dot, this silver chloride dot as the reference electrode. So carbon, carbon, and silver chloride. And so the insulating layer in this is the blue. Everything here that you see that's blue is the insulating layer. And behind that insulating layer are these contacts. So this is actually, I believe this is a silver, screen printed silver. And you can see the trace actually behind the blue insulating layer. Now, this blue insulating layer on these carbon screen printed electrodes is really just a polymer. I don't know exactly what kind of polymer, but it's a little bit of it's just a plastic that's insulating. And for other types of screen printed electrodes, such as that are ceramic, this is made out of plastic, but we have ceramic ones. You may have a glass insulating layer, a thin layer of glass on top. And if this insulating layer was removed, then all of these leads would be exposed. So all these silver traces that ultimately lead to the electrodes would all of a sudden be exposed. So this would be problematic if you didn't have this insulating layer, because everything that's connected into the electrochemical solution, if it's exposed and not insulating, it becomes part of the electrode. So if this blue wasn't here and I dipped the electrode, say, in between the pine and the research, that's where it goes up to in solution. All of this silver is now part of the working electrode. So I've totally changed the geometry. I've changed what the electromaterial is. I might be doing some kind of voltammetry thinking, oh, I got some really great current and I got, these really neat reactions to occur on glassy carbon, but that might not be the case. It's actually the silver that's in solution is actually doing the reacting. And similarly for the silver chloride trace, that's the same thing. And even not as big of an issue, but you have exposed silver on the counter electrode side as well. And maybe if you're doing a reduction reaction on the working electrode, you don't want silver to be oxidizing, potentially generating silver ions in your solution. So that is what the insulating layer is. It just protects these leads and only exposes the electrodes that you are interested in your electrochemical system. So hopefully that answers your question about the nature of insulating layers, what they are, and why you need to have them in your electrochemical system.
Very good. We'll get to the chat now, the live chat. I do have one more saved question, but I'll try to get to that at the end, I think.
Yeah, we've been waiting for that for a while.
It's been some time. It's been some time.
I don't know if he remembers.
I know. I will get to it. I promise at some point. It's going to happen. But until then, Digvijay has asked a question: which analog filters we should use for cyclic voltammetry? So first of all, the answer might be intimately related to the potentiostat and software that you're using, right? Those are, of course, I can only really illustrate for you my company and our software. Yeah. And well, I don't have a potentiostat connected at the moment, but I can at least kind of show you sort of how that works in our software. Every company is different and handles these kinds of things differently. And when you say analog filters, it's actually a good point, because there are analog and digital or software filters. And I will just be very blunt with you that some companies more heavily filter their electrochemical results than other companies. And some companies are much more open and allow the user to adjust and see how those work than other companies. I'm not slandering anybody by name here, but all I can tell you is that Pine allows you a tremendous amount of control over those kinds of features in our software and with our potentiostats on purpose. And we do not, I mean, we, as with every company, provide filters and we clean up data. I often say in a very try to be a joking way. I'm not trying to be critical, but if you saw what real electrochemical signals looked like, you would run screaming and choose a different science. Um, Raw electrochemical signals are very, very noisy. So everybody, every company, you have, all of us in the electrochemical industry, where we're in the business of making potentiostats, or if you're even making your own potentiostat, you have to filter and clean data up um, quite a decent amount, no matter what. Now, that being said, I do think, again, I'm not calling out anyone by name, but I do think that objectively there are some electrochemistry companies, potentiostats, and softwares platforms that very heavily filter and clean up their data, such that an answer to your question of what filters should I use, the answer is, well, they're all being used right now, like all of the most aggressive filters, such that I wonder to the extent of how accurate the data even is, because you can clean up data and apply such heavy handed filtering that um, it's almost not real in some sense. Now, the other option is that it is not filtered at all and it's very noisy and messy, and you don't want that either. Pine tends to err more on the side of letting you have controls if you need them. So, for instance, there are what are called low pass filters. And so you can choose a filter that these are not specific to a potentiostat because I don't have one connected. But for example, if you choose a very high frequency, it means that all signals and noise underneath that frequency will be permitted to get through, and you'll see them. So if you have a wiggle in your CV, right? One way to say what should my filter be, or my frequency of my filter, for instance. Well, if you're able to get enough data points that you could analyze how fast the wiggle is, this would be with something like a fast Fourier transform of the time data, time versus current, right? For instance. Well, if there's a characteristic frequency of like a kilohertz, if I choose a filter of 100 hertz, 1 kilohertz is above that, so it's going to filter that noise out. So that's one example. Our potentiostats, for instance, and I don't know if every company is exactly, but we use what are called low pass filters, which means what's underneath this frequency passes through, and what's faster than it is filtered away. And this is a hardware analog filter. There are filters that are software filters that do it as well, either during or afterwards. You can filter out some of that noise, but often that's kind of what you're looking for. And generally speaking, you only need to think about these when the automatic settings, again, sort of speaking for my company, I can't necessarily speak for every company, and not every company even provides these settings, I think. So if the automatic settings are still giving you noisy results, the typical procedure is to one by one decrease the filter. Okay, I go from a kilohertz to 100 hertz to 10 hertz to 1 hertz. Bring it down and bring the filter to a small as value as is available. There will only be so many filters in the hardware, for instance, and see if that helps clean up the data. The danger, of course, is that there's a small enough frequency. If you have a feature in your CV, for example, that's a fast like peak or something like that, if you over filter, you might actually filter out the result you're trying to get after. Over filtered data may not be accurate as well. So there is definitely some trial and error required. You want to probably pick a filter that is as high as you can get it, where your results are clean, because that means you're not over filtering and losing features that might be of interest to you. But again, in general, the answer is that it will depend on precisely which piece of equipment you're studying and using. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, or
Yeah, the other thing to keep in mind with the selection of the stability filter in particular, which is what Neil was
Mhm.
adjusting, is it also depends on the scan rate of your CV experiment.
Ah, yes.
So the analog or stability filter, we sometimes use the analogy that a potentiostat's kind of like a car, and as you're driving, you're trying to maintain a safe distance with the car that's in front of you, and you're using visual feedback to apply either the brakes or the accelerator, to maintain that safe distance, and that distance is the potential. So when you tell the potentiostat go at 1 volt, the potentiostat has this fast feedback loop to maintain that potential. So the stability filter, which is the analog filter you're talking about, um, is kind of like a how quickly and how slowly do you change your speed while driving? Because if there was no filter at all, it would just go as fast as possible. And like every time, you know, the car in front of you went up, you just like slam on the accelerator, and it's like, oh, you're too close. All right, I'm gonna brake like crazy, and then you'll get a lot of noise. You'll be oscillating back and forth. So so one parameter that's very important in a cyclic voltammetry experiment is the scan rate. As you're scanning faster and faster and faster, the potentiostat needs to respond faster and faster. So you need a faster analog filter when your scan rate is very high. Neil also just talked about IR compensation. When you have IR compensation on, there is an additional feedback filter that's kind of active. So that's, you the potentiostat's measuring a current, multiplying it by a resistance, adding it to the voltage that you're applying. So the speed at with which that process happens needs to be in line with the stability filter. So sometimes you need very fast frequencies when you're making certain measurements. And if this, you're talking specifically about cyclovoltammetry, but if you were doing, say, a chronoamperometry experiment, the measurement of the of the signal might need to be very fast to capture information in the microseconds time scale or something. So, um, and if it's too fast, you'll get a lot of noise. So there, as Neil said, there may be some trial and error. You want to pick a high frequency where you're not getting a lot of excess noise. Um, but you also want to make sure your potentiostat's reacting in time to whatever process is occurring. So that's, I'd say, my only other thing I'd add to the selection of analog filters is the scan rate, and whether you have IR compensation on or off is the other factor involved in the selection of the analog filter.
Yeah, that's a really good point. You've done workshops
Yeah.
showing the impact of that, so I figured
Oh yeah.
you'd have some points that I wasn't thinking of.
Well,
'Cause it's a
our
whole work. Is it one of the whole workshop labs? Is
well,
adjusting those things? Right?
not yet. I think that I think DVJ is probably a more advanced uh echem user. I think that messing around with analog filters is a
Yeah.
high level, very
Yeah.
high level activity that's even beyond like a basic workshop. But
Yeah, I think it is.
we sometimes ran into issues because of stability filter problems.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, and it's especially
Mhm.
hard. I've seen this, as I said. I'm not maligning anybody by name, but I have seen
Yeah.
instances and with customers, for example, they're using a different potentiostat and they aren't able to adjust those because the software doesn't allow you to.
Yeah.
And then they run into problems and you can't fix it. It's just the data is what it is.
Yeah,
So
or the filter just has a number like
yeah,
1, 2, 3. Doesn't tell you anything about how
yeah.
fast it is.
So you don't,
That's more
you just have to
useful.
pick one and hopefully, oh, 3 is better than 2. Like,
Yeah.
what does that even mean?
Yeah. What's that mean?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So yeah, DVJ, if you are still here, please let us know if you need any clarification, but we'll
Mhm.
move on for now.
Yeah.
So Ramsa asked, how does ZIR work in a potentiostat to determine uncompensated resistance? I had asked if you meant ZRA, which was like zero resistance. And then I looked it up, and as best I can tell, ZIR is Biologic, that one of our competitors has this. It's part of their software um, uh, platform or whatever you want to say. And I don't believe that it is anything. Um, I don't mean this in a bad way. It's not anything special. It's just it's their name, from what I can tell from a quick uh, search and looking at some of their application notes or something like that. It's just, from my understanding, a measurement of it's just an impedance measurement um, of uncompensated resistance, like an automatic impedance. Um, and so I'll kind of just illustrate for you briefly. I can't speak with perfect clarity as to how that specific technique works with like biologics, potentiostat, and software. I don't work for biologic, of course. I work for Pine, so I don't 100% know if it does this kind of procedure. But I'll explain how Pines, for example, automatic IR compensation works, and ours, so theirs is called ZIR, I guess, and ours is called
Oh yeah,
EISRU. Yeah, EISRU. So that's like what Pines is called. So this one's wrong and this one's right. No, I'm just kidding. So in general, the way that it is done is you take, for example, a Nyquist plot, ZR and Z imaginary, and then a Bode plot. So this would be phase, this is frequency, and this is
the Z mag.
Z magnitude. That's now it looks like an N because I'm not looking sideways,
Yeah.
but it's a Z magnitude. It's turned on its side. I hope that's clear. Okay, so if you have a full Nyquist plot, maybe it looks like this, right? What you're really after is none of this stuff, none of this stuff. You're really only after this region, right? This is the high frequency region, and this is where the IR drop is mainly measured. Okay, and it's basically this intercept is what you're after. Okay, so I'm going to delete all that. Oh, did I kill PowerPoint? I think it did.
Oh,
I undid too many shape drawings and I killed it. Yep.
It's okay. We'll get it back.
Fun. I'll get it back. That was great. That's happened before. It's like,
yeah.
Oh, there it is. Did it save it? I don't know if it saved
Recovered.
It didn't save my drawing. I didn't have anything saved. Anyway.
Oh yeah, because it's just review.
Yeah, it's just I was just drawing stuff.
That's true.
All right. So I deleted the whole thing, which is what I meant to do anyway.
Just make sure you share your screen.
Share the screen. That is also a thing to do.
Just a reminder.
It might help so they can see what I'm drawing.
Well, it'll be the same thing that you did before. So you haven't missed anything.
You missed nothing. It was me starting to draw these axes again. So here's my Nyquist plot. So I just drew the full range of like frequencies in the Nyquist plot, and we're not going to focus on all of that. So now what we're going to do is focus on just the high frequency. So just the high frequency. So like starting right here, the Nyquist plot, if I zoom in, I'm going to have a handful of data points or whatever. So this is zoomed way in. And then what I'm really after on the Nyquist plot is this intercept where ZI is equal to 0, whatever this ZR value is. Now, what that corresponds to on the Bode plot, for instance, is a 0 phase angle, or as close to a 0 phase angle as possible. What? Let me do this color coded so it's sort of. So this is blue, phase angle being blue. Okay, and so the phase angle might be close to 0, and then as I were to go to lower and lower frequencies, it would start to dip down. And then let's say the Z mag is red. So whatever the Z mag is equivalent to Z real at those particular frequencies, and then Z mag would start to go up. So what I'm after is basically this point here, which corresponds to one of these points here and one of these points here. So it's effectively, again, what our EISRU does is it hunts over a short range of frequencies at high frequency and finds essentially the place where the phase angle is closest to 0 and takes the corresponding magnitude of the impedance, and that is, so that Z at the phase angle closest to 0 is equal to RU. So that is how this works. Now, again, from what I can tell, and I don't know because I'm not, I might be wrong here. There might be more sophistication in the program, which is certainly possible. What I read was that the ZIR technique in their software does something like 100 kilohertz. It arbitrarily picks a high frequency of something like 100 kilohertz and just measures it. Now, in some cases, that might be fine because let's say 100 kilohertz is here and you get this value. Okay, well, that's close. Maybe it's all right, right? But the reason why we program ours to do a short range of frequencies is because if instead your phase angle does something like here and then it goes up and then it goes down, well, what you're after is this port right here, right? You want the phase angle that's closest to 0. But if 100 kilohertz is right here or right here, you're not getting the most ideal measurement. So it's better to take a short range of frequencies and then pick the ideal point rather than just assume that 100 kilohertz is going to always be the most appropriate place with which to get RU for all systems. That's just not likely to be the case necessarily. So again, I am not 100% sure, and certainly if they're some of these programs, they hunt and peck, like they pick a frequency, do a thing, pick another pick, and sort of zero in on the most appropriate one. That's what our software does. But it's something to that effect from what I can tell. The ZIR technique, it's just some single or range of high frequency impedance measurements to determine the uncompensated resistance, which is effectively the magnitude of the impedance where the phase angle is close to 0. So
All right.
again,
and that's how that technique works.
yes. So yeah, follow up if you
Yeah.
have additional information or clarification, and I can talk about it more if you need to. So let's see. Did Digvijay have some follow up here?
No, just saying that he enjoys the stuff, and he'll probably
to see
look forward to other
adjusting the parameters. Yeah, there's definitely some trial and error you're most probably going through here. So it looks like you're on your way, I suppose I'd say.
Let's see. The next question is from Arthur.
Oops,
I think we clicked it at the same time.
You click it. I'm good.
Okay, I'll click it.
That's like when you're like trying to open the door.
Yeah.
And you're like, unlock it. No. No, don't pull the handle. Wait for me to unlock the door.
Yeah, that's right. That's what we just.
That's what we did like 3 times.
Yeah, we both have control over the button.
We do.
That displays
We're
it.
fighting. We're fighting live on stream.
So Arthur has a question. Hey guys, is there any possibility to construct an equivalent circuit based on Nyquist data numerically? So this is kind of this is to say you have an EIS plot, some kind of Nyquist plot, and you can backtrack what the equivalent circuit would be. And I don't know. I don't think so. I think, from what I know, what Niels at least told me with things like Kramer's Kronig, it's like, well, you can fit any almost any circuit with a ton of elements to it to any set of data. So in a way, right now, to my knowledge, there isn't a way of doing it numerically, but I don't know for sure.
It feels like there might be some way that like an AI, or some very sophisticated algorithm could do something along these lines, but to my knowledge, this does not exist. There are some ways, for instance, that you could conceive whether it's AI or it's some sort of I don't know, pattern recognition of some kind, could observe a Nyquist plot and then suggest, like, that is conceivable that could happen. As I tend to talk about when this kind of topic comes up, I think the problem in general that I would have with this is that it is not necessarily that it wouldn't be possible. It's that it probably isn't ethical, or at least isn't the right approach, in my professional opinion. There's always a job for you as the researcher to look at your data with real knowledge like in a human brain, not an AI chip, of what is happening physically, and to determine an appropriate equivalent circuit or multiple different possibilities of equivalent circuits based on what you know to be happening or what you suspect is happening. That is still, in my opinion, and maybe this is a old-fashioned comment, and I'm not getting with the times, and that may be the case. Fine, but I am not really someone who will, to this point, agree that we ought to consider, you know, more automated processes for that stage. The circuit fitting and the algorithm minimizing, obviously, those are necessary steps to be automated. And mathematics, we benefit tremendously by having those kinds of algorithms programmed for us, and all of that. But the selection of the circuit is still very much something that you, as the researcher, really should be doing yourself. It's certainly possible to have like numerical fitting, numerical analysis, numerical modeling of like any data set, essentially Nyquist plot or otherwise. Like, that's possible. But to extrapolate to an equivalent circuit, that specific kind of analysis is really something that requires you, as the researcher, to use your intuition and your knowledge to try to apply the appropriate one. That's still something that is, at least in my opinion, beyond, and should be beyond, the scope of automation or numerical analysis, let's say.
Yeah, I think it's tough because I can't envision a world where it's like, if you look at enough data sets, you could probably train some kind of model
Yeah.
to estimate, like, well, most of these things look like this. But even, it's interesting, like even semicircles, what is it, DRT can show you like, oh well, one big semicircle could actually be two, lumped together semicircles, really,
Yep.
like,
Yep.
and it's very hard to see that, just because like visually it's just like depressed a little bit, the Nyquist plot.
Yeah.
Can you train a model to like understand or think about that? And then let's not forget, um impedance, really, at the end of the day, when we have all these electrochemical systems, equivalent circuits to a certain degree are also very convenient, right? It's a convenient model that we use. But if you look at Mark Orzum's book on electrochemical impedance spectroscopy, some things some things can be modeled very, very well, but it's not a circuit element. It's just impedance is frequency dependent voltage over frequency dependent current. And if we have equations that describe, for example, we have the Butler-Volmer equation that explains how does the current change as a function of voltage. You could plug that in, for a frequency dependent current and get values, but that's not a circuit element. But that would be a more accurate description, or view of the impedance. So there are a lot of complications. Also, it's like, people like to have chatbots because they're used a lot. I don't know how many people really have like libraries of Nyquist plots. Also, that assumes like, okay, you're gonna build one of these AI models for having a Nyquist plot. Take your data and then build the equivalent circuit. That assumes that their circuits are correct. Most of the people's circuits are bad.
It's an awfully big assumption.
It's a huge assumption.
Yes,
A lot of
absolutely.
people have like, they don't know if it's correct or not. It's just their best guess. So
Yes.
anyway, that's our kind of like ranting session about like,
That's
I can't have this AI
it's kind of
stuff.
my one of my soapboxes, that, along with uh
Chi-squared.
well,
Chi, oh,
chi
that's
squared's
not,
more of like, I don't like it, but I understand why it's a question.
okay.
It's the Tafel plot of any LSV data. That's the one that
Mm.
probably triggers me the most.
Oh yeah,
Just
that
just
triggers the other one.
stop turning your CVs into Tafel plots. Just
Uh,
please stop doing it.
well, I
We
don't
all
know.
we all have our crosses to bear, right?
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
like my permanent cross to bear. I drives me nuts. You know how
yeah.
it is.
I know. I understand.
Yes.
Uh, let's see. So,
Are you?
I'm working on a thing. If you want to pull up the question, I just wanted to.
Is this for the supercapacitor?
Oh, you can
question?
answer that one.
Oh, I actually don't know if you really have an answer for
I don't
it,
know
but
if
we
I
can
do
we
either.
can talk
But
about it.
stall with me for a minute on that as I work on the one about the electrolyzer.
So
I want to test the thing.
Zuvari asks, hello, will you guys please recommend me the playlist for understanding the core concepts related to supercapacitors, their key performance metrics, and electrochemical testing? And when you say that it's a a playlist, you assume it's like we already have a playlist of videos that talk about these things. And unfortunately, Pine, we don't have such a playlist of videos or content related to supercapacitors.
Like specifically, yeah.
Specifically, and I don't have a lot of personal experience with supercapacitors. I end up talking to people at like North Carolina State University. They have people working on supercapacitors, and I ask them a lot of questions, mostly about the fundamental science of pseudocapacitance, because that's a topic that's very interesting. But unfortunately, I'm sorry, I cannot make a recommendation for a playlist or topics, but I just know that there's probably a bunch of articles online that talk about it. So I'm sorry, I don't have a playlist or anything about it. If I had more experimental experience with working with them, I could tell you more. But I'll tell you this: probably a couple key performance metrics for a supercapacitor is the capacitance.
I think that's probably
That's at
true.
least one.
That's probably one of them.
That's probably a key. If I had to guess, it's probably the capacitance.
That's some heavy analysis right there. The capacitance of a capacitor
is a key
is
performance metric.
That's why we do these live streams.
That's why we do,
because we're on top of stuff, you know.
And stability. That's probably another key performance metric, is how stable is it?
Exactly.
Like,
how many times can it capacitate?
Yep.
That's not a word. I'm just being a jerk. Yes.
You
no,
know,
but
I mean,
that is
charge and discharge.
Yeah, exactly.
Without losing performance.
A lot of times these kind of capacitance testing does involve something. You just cycle it back and forth at like 1,000 times or 10,000 times or whatever the number is, and see how it retains, whether or not it retains its capacity.
Yeah.
Or falls apart. What the metrics are, for instance, like what's a good one of those or not, depends. That I can't answer that per se, right? And of course, as we said, the playlist, I don't know if there's any sort of official set of supercapacitor pedagogy or content out there. There very well might be. We don't have that specifically, as Alex said. But honestly, the unsatisfying answer is the scientific literature. Unfortunately, there's really no substitute for looking through a scientific literature.
It's probably some review articles to start with
that will help you aggregate some of the information for sure. And
Yeah.
they'll have metrics like, well, this many farads per meter squared or meter, like that sort of metric will be some of it for sure. Or like, this is its capacity at cycle 10 and this is its capacitance at cycle 1,000. So some of those will be part of it as well. But yeah, unfortunately, like the exact answers to those or that is probably buried in the scientific literature, and it just is going to require some diligence on your part. I wish I had a better answer, like for a quick and easy sort of shortcut, if you will. That's what we try to do here, right? And try to help out with some of these concepts, but that definitely is just going to require some of your time, I think. Apologies, I guess, is all I can say.
Sorry.
But yeah, good luck to you in your research, I suppose. Let's see. Ved has a question. Hi guys, these live sessions are really helpful. I'm glad you enjoy them. I was wondering if you could show how to draw the basic equivalent circuit of a PEM electrolysis cell or electrolyzer cell. So actually, I have, coincidentally, some data that was provided to me previously, and I did a webinar on this person's data. They submitted to me a PEM electrolyzer. I think it's a PEM electrolyzer is what they were doing. is a water electrolyzer. So I'll just show this really quick, and then you can sort of
Mhm.
let me know if this is at least equivalent to what you are referring to with an electrolysis cell. So a PEM electrolyzer, um, they were using to produce hydrogen and oxygen. And so the PEM electrolyzer here involves sending water on the anode side. You do the oxygen evolution reaction, which produces oxygen gas on the anode side. The cathode side, effectively, you might flow a carrier gas, but you produce hydrogen. And so this is the kind of electrolysis or electrolyzer cell that was involved in this person's data. And then, as I said, I'll show you the point of this was they sent me EIS data that I tried to help with some analysis. So I'll show you what that looks like, and I'll show you, I think, 3 possibilities of circuits. There's no one answer, I would say, but there's multiple. Again, this sort of back to my last point we made about the looking at the data and then picking an equivalent circuit is a manual process. It involves you sort of using your intuition and analysis to try to figure that out. So these are some of the data sets that they had sent to me. And so you can see, for instance, this is the Nyquist plot. There's some high frequency kind of stuff that probably was artifact, not really needed. And then a lot of the data that I have seen in the literature, probably not all, but a lot of it follows this kind of pattern where there's sort of a semicircle here feature, and then maybe another semicircle, but it kind of folds down to the x-axis. And then this was a second data set. It was a similar looking kind of curve, slightly different. I don't remember, to be honest. I guess different potentials they did these at. It's been some time. This webinar is on our YouTube channel. You can take a look at that if you wish. So the first and most simple method for or analysis that I would propose would be that this looks, neglecting the high frequency part here for a moment, it's not really to be considered for the analysis, is that we have effectively 2 processes, right? We have one semicircle here, and then there's a bit of an inflection at this point. I'm trying to zooming in and out to kind of illustrate what I'm talking about, but and then another one. So what the first attempt at an analysis might be 2 RC or RQ elements. So the first thing I'll do is exclude the high frequency little tail here, just to get that out of the way. And then I'll try to just get a quick little analysis of this. It's an electrolyzer. I think this was a pretty big one. So you can see the capacitances are very high, as tends to be the case with electrolyzers. So let's see if it kind of gets still pretty large. And the resistances are very, very low too. So that made an impact. It's almost like a battery, this electrolyzer. It's what you get with systems that have are very tightly packed and pressed together, which can be the case with batteries and fuel cells sometimes. So I'm just going to change the limits of some of these parameters very briefly, and then we can kind of get a decent estimate of the fit. I'm not going to spend too long on the circuit fitting, other than to just sort of illustrate how you can get a decent result for these. Okay, so look, this is not terrible. Again, without iterating too much more, you can see that I have 2 distinct charge transfer processes or semicircles, 2 distinct RQ or RC void elements. So that's like the most simple thing. And then a simple attempt at an analysis might be that one of these charge transfer processes would relate to the cathode and the other one to the anode. Those are maybe the 2 processes that are taking place. And in this case, probably the first one would be the cathode and the second one would be the anode, for instance. And there you go. Now, another possibility would be to incorporate what is called a Warburg short element. So I'll draw that for you. It's not showing. I
We'll show. Yeah.
gotta share
Yeah.
the screen because
Mhm.
it's like a modal. So let me share the whole screen so you can see this circuit designer. So
Mhm.
what I'll have is a leading resistor for ohmic resistance, and then an RQ or RC element, but then I can add a Warburg short in here. And so a Warburg short describes diffusion. And so with an electrolyzer, a lot of times people will think of this analytically as um, something like the water diffusion. It's a gas. Often it's gas phase, but there's water being input, for example, to the anode. So you might have diffusional kind of properties either through the membrane or in the water phase on the back of the anode or something like that. So precisely how that relates or is represented is maybe up for interpretation. I'll just leave that up to folks in the literature. But again, I won't spend a ton of time doing the circuit fit here, but this is one possibility as well for your circuit fit. I think what I'll do is I'll jump. I think I have the results already probably in one of these other ones. So you can see that it'll take some time to do the fit. I don't want to take too long and do that. I think I probably have it done previously. This is that same circuit. So if you see here, this is another way to represent the data. It looks pretty good. You know, there's some scatter, but this person had some noise maybe in the low frequency, so it's not going to fit perfectly, and that's fine. But what we have here is a fit that describes a charge transfer process and then a diffusional process through a thickness of a known length. And with an electrolyzer or a fuel cell, it's rather obvious that that comes in the form of the gas diffusion layer, or like the piece of carbon paper, or there's thicknesses where gas or reagents will diffuse, but the thickness is known because you know how you have 100 micron thick or whatever the thick piece of paper or electrode is in your electrolyzer, the microstructure. So when you know that thickness, you get this kind of behavior where it curls down. If it wasn't the case, you would have it shoot up like this, like a regular infinite Warburg. It would go up at an angle, but instead, because your diffusion layer is of a known thickness, it curls down like that. And so in an electrolyzer and a fuel cell, you often get that. And then finally, the last circuit that can be used would just be like almost a combination of those two things. So I know this is a bit of a small one to see, but you can imagine instead of the one RQ circuit with a Warburg short, you could have two, like one void element plus the Randall's element with Warburg. And that's if you want to maybe incorporate this beginning feature or not, which I didn't typically do, but you could incorporate this sort of tail if that were considered to be a real, quote unquote, real feature or not. My inclination is that it is not, but it's a possibility if you want to include it. So those are just a few examples with some data that I, again, had previously that shows you, some possibilities for equivalent circuits of an electrolysis cell. So follow up if you would like, if you want to see any more of like the circuit fitting or things of that nature. So
Yeah.
okay.
Also, just want to give a shout out. Looks like Wang became a tier 2 member. Thank you so much.
Much appreciated. Thank you
Much
so
appreciated. That helps keep us chugging along, because we like to provide just free content, on our live stream, and support through membership is really, really helpful. So thank you so much.
Yeah, very much appreciated. Thank you guys. Okay, I think at long last I can answer this question.
Oh yeah.
So Sanjeev had asked a question. I think at this point it was like a month ago.
Almost a month, maybe.
But I know this is a topic that does tend to get a lot of interest from from folks in the electrochemical community, just about galvanostatic charge, discharge, and batteries. And so, and he had asked this question: how does the cathodic anodic time depend when representing on the GCD curve? So I think what I'll do is just talk about this a little bit and kind of try to illustrate where time exists when you're doing galvanostatic charge discharge. So galvanostatic charge discharge, so GCD, right? This is where you apply some current until the voltage equals, let's just say, V upper, and then that's charge, and then it's apply the negative current until V is equal to V lower. So that's essentially a galvanostatic charge discharge, as simply as I can kind of distill it, right? It's applying a current, galvanostatic, hence that's what the G stands for. So I'm controlling the current. The charge is generally applying a positive current until the voltage reaches some upper limit, and then applying the negative current until it reaches the lower limit. So what we would show on a plot for that might be something like this, where this will be the voltage axis, right? And let's say this is my lower limit, whatever it happens to be, and this is my upper limit, voltage upper limit. Okay, and so I'll apply a current, and my voltage will start to rise. There's usually a plateau, and then it will hit the limit. Okay. And then if I'm starting at the upper limit instead, because it depends on what the voltage is before you start, you might start with already at the top and you're going down. So if I'm starting at the top, I might be adding a negative voltage, and it will do this until it reaches the lower limit, right? Now, what I didn't draw yet is what this x-axis is, right? X-axis. So what is this? Now, what you will see often in the literature is that this is capacity. Okay. So this is usually something like amp hours or milliamp hours, or sometimes amp hours per gram, which is just an area, a mass specific capacity. Okay. This is how we it's a normalization essentially of our GCD. Okay, so moving forward here, let me draw some more lines to clarify things. Okay, if my battery has 1,000 milliamp hours of capacity, right? This is my battery capacity. This means that I can apply 1,000 milliamps for 1 hour continuously. That is how much, or that's for charging, or I can take out discharge minus 1,000 milliamps for 1 hour, right? So by the same logic, if I add 500 milliamps, half as much, or I take away 500 milliamps, then I can do that for 2 hours. Okay, so you can think about just adding up. This is just charge. If this right, the unit of charge is coulombs. So 1,000 milliamps times 1 hour is 1,000 milliamp hours. But I can do a simple conversion here, 1000 milliamp hours times 1 hour, 3600 seconds per hour. And that's going to give me, right, 3600 with 3 more zeros. And that's milliamps times hour over hour, the hour cancels, times seconds. So an amp is a coulomb per second times second. So this is millicoulombs. I know this unit, I should change it to 3600 coulombs, right? But the point is, milliamp hours or amp hours is the same as coulombs. It's an amount of charge. So back to here, what this is really is actually just coulombs of charge that I've passed. What this doesn't tell me is how fast or how long it took. So by the same logic, 1000 milliamps for 1 hour is the same charge as 500 milliamps for 2 hours, right? The mathematics works out the same. It's all 1000 milliamp hours or 3600 coulombs. It's the same. But one of them took 2 hours and one of them took 1 hour. So when you look at it on the same plot, it's the same x-axis. So the question is, where's time, right? Now, this is what we call the C rate in batteries. It's how fast we charge or discharge. So a lot of times what we do is we plot this as capacity, okay? Because we want to see how well the battery performs at different rates. And so what we might have is what's 1C. So that's 1000 milliamps, because it's one hour. It takes 1 hour to do that. And I end up with these looking curves, and it behaves fine. And then if I do half as much current, it lasts twice as long. That's called C over 2. Okay, so if I do C over 2, what I might find, I'm just going to do both of these in green, is that it actually behaves a little bit better. I drew that way too high, whatever. Is that it behaves a little bit better. Okay, so the capacity is a little better because when I charge it slowly, I'm kind of giving it more time and it behaves a little better. Now, on the other hand, if I add more current and I go like 4C, I put 4 times as much current, it only lasts 15 minutes. Well, the capacity might not be quite as good because when you charge up a battery faster, it behaves a little more poorly. And so what I'm doing is I'm studying how the capacity looks for my battery based on how much current I'm putting in at any given time. But what I'm not, but the reason that you can compare these is because I have this all as capacity. So if I have 500 milliamps, 1000 milliamps, or 4000 milliamps of current, I multiply by how long it took, time 1 times time 2, however long it took. And that's like a normalization. So what I'm allowed to do is look at how they perform and compare them. What the tricky thing is that if I plotted this by time, right? If this was time instead in voltage, well, I would have 3 situations. Let's say C, let's say C over 2, and 4C. Well, at C rate, this is going to take 1 hour. Okay. I'm going to make my axis a little longer. So my charge and discharge is going to take 1 hour, or at least close to 1 hour. C over 2, it should take 2 hours. And so my charge discharge is going to be something like this. And so that's my time. 4C is going to take 15 minutes. It's a quarter of the time, right? And so it'll be something like this. Now you can see how far spread out these are because now I'm showing them by time and I'm not normalizing by the capacity. And then the other thing you can see is that this 4C was supposed to last 15 minutes. That's a quarter of an hour. But did it last 13 minutes or 14 minutes or 12 minutes? Well, it's hard to tell exactly. Like, was it really good? Like, if it lasts exactly 15 minutes, that's perfect. But if it lasts a little bit less, I want to know that. But I can't tell how that compares to the 1 hour test because they're they're too spread out. It doesn't really allow me to see precisely how well they did in comparison with each other. So where is the time on a GCD? The answer is that it is actually buried in the x-axis, right? This is what it would look like if I plotted it by time. They would be very spread out. I multiply time by the current I applied so I can normalize them by capacity or charge. Okay. So these are the two differences here. This is if you plotted the GCD by time. It's actually just the x-axis. But again, the reality is that what we do is on a GCD is we plot capacity. Time is buried in this axis. And so another way to look at this is that relatively speaking, if this is the 1000 milliamp hours, that's my battery capacity right here, then I can say that at each rate, I got almost the amount of time it was supposed to take. And I got almost the capacity I was supposed to have. But I know proportionately, for example, the 4C was, halfway as much as it should. So it took 7 minutes or 8 minutes. But I can tell more clearly when it's normalized this way, just how good or bad that kind of test was. So again, just in summary here, the GCD, the time is buried in the x-axis, but it's normalized because it allows us to determine more easily as scientists how well our battery is performing by normalizing it to capacity or charge. So I hope that kind of clarifies that a little bit. And if that person or anybody else is interested in GCD, there's a little explanation for you that I've been trying to give for several weeks, and now I've finally done it, and I feel like I can retire now.
Yes,
so.
That's right.
Okay.
So actually, we got several questions that just came in, fairly somewhat intense questions. But Anonymous A recently asked how to understand Mott-Schottky plots. I mean, how to take these plots for understanding the nature of our semiconductor material, whether it's P-type or N-type. And then please help me understand Mott-Schottky theory and also how to know you are taking these plots correctly.
Well, Mott-Schottky theory and all of that is a bit of an in-depth question. I am actually currently working on a webinar specifically on Mott-Schottky to address that exact question. That will be within a few months, probably I will have that ready. So stay tuned to our webinar offering, I suppose I'd say. I will be doing one eventually on that. But I can talk very briefly about at least the first part here, how to know whether it's N-type or P. It's actually very, very simple. It's the slope of the Mott-Schottky plot. So Mott-Schottky involves taking impedance, usually at a high frequency or a short-ish range of frequencies, at several different voltages. Okay, and actually, let me do a thing first and share Mott-Schottky equation. Probably, or I probably have it. Actually, you know what? I think I have it in this slideshow. I already have open. I don't have to find it. Let me do that instead. So first, I'll just give a bit of a background. This is in the same slides. I think I have the Mott-Schottky equation here somewhere. Yeah. So this is the Mott-Schottky equation. Is all of this craziness down here? It's this equation right here, right? And it relates the space charge capacitance, which I don't really know if I want to talk in too much depth now. Again, it's going to be covered in a webinar. It's a lot to really just dive into all of the theory of Mott-Schottky and semiconductors and everything.
It's not that bad. You know it so well, Neil.
I do now.
You know it really well.
Yeah,
now.
yeah.
You could probably just tell him answer all of his theory questions.
All the theory questions. Yeah, look what you're doing to me.
No,
yeah, no, it's
we've been talking about this.
I
feel like I have a much better
for sure
idea about what on earth is going on in Mott-Schottky now.
So do I.
But
we've been having endless conversations about this for years, and we finally understand it. So,
Yeah.
yeah, in short, the space charge capacitance is a region inside the semiconductor where there's a capacitance because of its semiconducting properties lends itself to this. It's balanced by the double layer, in the space charge capacitance is smaller than the double layer capacitance, which allows in a capacitor, in a semiconductor, which allows you to measure it preferentially via EIS. And so we make the assumption that the capacitance that we measure in EIS is effectively the space charge. Sometimes you can do a corrective factor, but we generally just assume that capacitance we measure is the space charge capacitance. And that's what's this CSC squared in the left side of the Mott-Schottky equation. And the variable on the right side is the potential. And so what we are able to do is make a plot of 1 over the capacitance versus the potential. And we get a slope and an intercept. The slope is this stuff. The intercept is this stuff. Okay. And the primary things that we are after are the flat band potential, which is this term here, and the electron donor density, which is this term here. And so we effectively get the electron donor density from the slope of our Mott-Schottky plot, and we get the flat band potential from the y-intercept. The rest of these are constants: dielectric permittivity in a vacuum, the area, the charge of an electron, fundamental charge, Boltzmann constant, temperature, etc. Okay, so that's a very quick overview of the Mott-Schottky equation. When you do this plot, I'll just answer again the first part of your question. It's a relatively simple answer. When you make a Mott-Schottky plot, you plot 1 over C squared, CSC, CSC, versus potential. And if it is, let's just draw 2. So if it's an N-type semiconductor, there's an easy way to remember this. Just think opposite world. If it's an N-type semiconductor, the slope will be positive. You might get something like this. So when you take the slope of your Mott-Schottky plot, this is slope is positive. That means it's an N-type semiconductor. And then conversely, it's the exact opposite, as you can imagine. If you do your Mott-Schottky plot and the slope is negative, it is a P-type semiconductor. So it's opposite of like the name, and type of semiconductor. Slope starts with the letter S. Slope ends with the letter E. Is negative. Negative. Yeah. There we go. Negative. So on the Mott-Schottky plot, the slope that you get is indicative of the type. That's just how it works out. It just is. And it's opposite. So P-type, positive type, whatever semiconductor has a negative slope on the Mott-Schottky plot. N-type or negative type semiconductor has a positive slope on the Mott-Schottky plot. So that's how that works out practically. I guess the Mott-Schottky theory, how you're taking these. So if you're taking them correctly, you will often get something that looks like what I just drew. It often makes a sigmoid kind of a thing, but the reality is that
it should be a straight line.
It should be a straight line, but if you deviate far on either side, you might get a sort of other shapes, because there's this is a whole thing, right? There's a lot that could be said about that. You can get weird inversion things where the minority carrier becomes the majority carrier. At potentials, you can get something where at certain potentials it behaves like an N-type, and at other potentials it behaves like a P-type. Like you can get almost like a U, where half of it is a N or P-type, behavior, and the other half is the other one. So semiconductors may behave differently at different potentials. So how do you know you're doing it right? Well, some of it is, I have a material and I know it's an N-type, like I've prepared it, right? I know it's an N-type semiconductor. So you want to pick a potential range where you are, it's almost an after the fact justification, rationalization. Like if I'm doing a range where I'm getting my Mott-Schottky plot is a straight line, and I have a positive slope, I'm almost, that's a good indication I'm probing the N-type semiconductor behavior pretty well. And then, there's the other thing that we talked about, for example, the potential you're at really makes a difference.
Yeah.
When you're right around the flat band potential, there is fundamentally
No space charge.
there's no space charge. Exactly. So,
So you can't measure it correctly.
yeah. So it's almost like a catch-22, whatever the right analogy is here. When you do the Mott-Schottky analysis, the slope is indicative of the positive or negative N or P type. And then from the slope, you get the electron donor density. Okay.
Mhm.
From the y-intercept, you get a measure of the flat band potential.
Mhm.
Then what you want to do is look at the potential range that is on the x-axis of the Mott-Schottky plot. If you find the measurement of the flat band potential corresponds closely with the range of potentials that you have done Mott-Schottky at, you might need to repeat the experiment at a slightly different potential, because again, it's a lot to talk about, and it involves band theory, and I do see there's other questions. I don't want to dwell too long on this, but fundamentally, where you are at the flat band potential, it means it's where the conduction and valence bands are flat. They're not bending, and the bending of the bands is what leads to the space charge. And so you sort of don't have a space charge. Is it you have none, or there's very little? I guess it's none.
Yeah, it's
Right.
so
At the flat band potential.
yeah, so at the flat band potential, it is so when the bands are bending, that is you have, and they call it space charge because you're creating charge separation
Right.
inside the semiconductor where
Yeah.
it acts like a capacitor.
There's a distribution of the holes or the negative electron buildup.
Yeah, if you have
going
negative
into-
carriers
Mhm.
or positive carriers, if you're N or P type,
Yeah.
and whichever one is the quote majority carrier is going to move to a side, again depending on the potential. So I guess so you're going to have a positive slope with an N type, and generally if you have a very high potential, I think it bends. I have to look at a diagram to
Yeah.
see whether it bends the bands up or bends the bands down. It's also a little bit confusing. One thing that's very confusing about this is probably the thing that makes Mott-Schottky analysis, in my opinion, the most confusing is that the diagrams of the semiconductor are energy diagrams,
Yes.
right? So it's an energy axis. But the Mott-Schottky plot is 1 over the space charge capacitance by the voltage, the potential, and you're changing the potential. So when you change the potential, you're changing the energy,
Yep.
but it's not easy to figure out like, well, which one's which. When you go to, and they tend to be opposite in terms of their correlation. So remember, like a negative delta G, which is a spontaneous reaction, has a positive potential, and a negative potential has a positive energy.
Yeah.
So they end up flipping when you look at the semiconductor band diagram versus the potential that you're applying. So just keep that in mind. But if you're doing an N type, we found you need to apply positive potentials to create the space charge region, and you'll get weird data if you actually apply potentials near
The flat band.
the flat band potential.
Yeah.
So the flat band potential is extrapolated.
Yeah. And the reason is
plot.
that the capacitance you're measuring is no longer the space charge capacitance, which means
Correct.
the Mott-Schottky plot is fundamentally violated.
Mhm.
The assumption of it is the space charge versus 1 over the c squared. So the values you get are fundamentally not accurate, because the you'll measure a capacitance from impedance, like
Mhm.
you'll always get some capacitance, but at the flat band potential is not the space charge, or at the very least it's convoluted, and you would have to correct for the Helmholtz, so like it's not,
Well, it's just that,
or there
It's-
isn't one
it-
at all.
it's-
That too, yeah.
Well, and actually, this is funny
Or
because
they're equal or something, right?
there is a question that's actually talking about this very topic.
Well, let's go into it.
So, this question, and I know we're skipping a bunch of people, but he's asking a question that's on the same topic,
Mhm.
which is how do we correlate the flat band potential of the semiconductor to the potential of zero charge for metals? For instance, we can approximate the flat band potential as the potential of zero charge.
I don't think that's correct.
I don't know if
Not
that's
necessarily,
that's
right?
yeah, I don't know if that's necessarily correct. Um, I would say, let's see. So the potential
Remember the
of
answer we
zero
came up with? The flat band
charge.
potential is basically a reference,
It's basically a reference point.
but where the bands, but it's just as you were describing
Mhm.
before, where the bands are bending. So I mean, I'll try to draw. You're better at drawing this than me, but I'm going to try.
I just never get the direction right because
Oh yeah,
everything's like flipped.
yeah. Forget about the direction. I might be totally off on the direction. I don't particularly care.
Mhm.
When it comes to the bands, we have the conduction band,
Yeah.
right? And the valence band, and they're separated. There's a split here if it's
Yep.
a semiconductor, right?
Mhm.
They might be touching or overlapping or whatever if it's a metal. So this is a semiconductor. We have a valence band. The valence band is all full. Conduction band is mostly empty, right?
Mhm.
And there's a band gap. This is the band gap, the distance between these two. Now,
Mhm.
when you're applying a potential, again, forget about the Fermi level and all the fancy stuff. I'm just going to draw the band bending and try to be
Yeah.
kind of illustrate this.
Mhm.
The valence band and the conduction band will bend.
Let's just say that, yeah, they bend up.
They bend in concert with each other or
Yes.
whatever, right?
Mhm.
Okay. Now, this right here is flat band, right? This side.
Yeah.
But this side here is where the band is bending. This is where you're measuring Mott-Schottky.
Mhm.
And the reason is that this axis here, I've sort of drawn this like just bands, but this is actually like position, the x-axis, and the y-axis is like energy, not potential, right? Energy, essentially.
Yeah.
Okay, and so what that means is that the energy, this right here is like the surface, right?
Yeah.
Surface of the electrode.
Yeah, the electrode electrolyte interface.
Right. So what that means is that as you go in the electrode itself, like physically microns or millimeters, even whatever the distance is inside the electrode, there's a distribution here of energy where electrons are filled or not filled states. And so this bending of the band causes a capacitance because at the surface there's like more electrons or holes or whatever the charge buildup is at this point than here. And so the difference, like this difference in energy level across a distance, that's a capacitor. Like a capacitor is a distribution of charge across a distance, a space. So that's where the space charge capacitance comes from. Now, when the bands are flat, there is no distant difference between here and here. There's no energy difference. So there effectively is no capacitance. Or at the very least, you'd say something like it's equal to the capacitance like at the Helmholtz layer, like the double layer capacitance. And so it's here what we have is that the Helmholtz capacitance is really large comparatively. And so because the space charge capacitance is small, it dominates and we can measure it. So as you get close to the flat band, because there's no difference in energy as I go in, there's effectively no space charge region.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't mean there's no, what was the question? No charge, zero charge.
The potential of zero charge for a metal. And I don't know enough about the potential of zero charge. I don't know if it really means.
I think there's a difference. Let's see, that's the thing. There's a difference between zero capacitance and zero charge. It doesn't mean there's no charge. It means there's no capacitance. Space charge capacitance.
Yeah. But I actually don't know enough about, like, when they say the potential of zero charge, I don't know enough about.
With a metal?
Yeah, with a metal, what that means.
Potential of zero charge.
I mean, does it mean that the like, there's no charge on the metal surface? Is that what you're saying? It's the potential where there's no charge on the surface, or that's
like no net charge, maybe, right? Because there's charge, like there's a double layer capacitor there, so there is charge.
Yeah,
right?
but you could adjust the double layer capacitance so that there is no charge. Like we can move the, like, maybe, I don't know enough about this, but or at least this is what I where's my, hold on, here we go. So to be filled in with the Mott-Schottky equation, because I'm like, oh yeah, that's a useful equation we need to have.
It is a useful equation.
But the let's see, review, starting gain. And so we always say, right, so there is so if this is your metal and you have the potential of your metal, and this is all I've been thinking about forever. And then you have the potential of your solution, which is like up here, and then you have the potential of your metal, just down here. So this is, this is solution. It's blue. But no, wait, why did it not change to blue? So this is blue. This is all solution. It's nice and pretty blue. And then we have a drop, the electrical double layer, or something like this. So you always see this kind of picture where the difference between the potential of the solution, which is flat out here, and as we go into the potential of the metal, we have this potential drop, and this is the double layer. So you have, this is the kind of IHP, inner Helmholtz plane, and then you hit some kind of OHP, outer Helmholtz plane, and then you have this like diffuse region. So there's charge that is required necessarily diffuse region. And I think that the fact that there's this potential difference generates charge. Like, I don't know if it's negative or negative charge here and then positive charge here, and then it creates, positive charge should be here, and hence creates this field, the double layer. So do we use a potentiostat to move the potential of the metal such that it's equal to the potential here, and hence there is no charge? Is that what the potential of zero charge is? Because I have no idea.
So the person commented
Did he
back,
comment?
Well, yeah, I think it was what I had just after I had said, yes, exactly. There's no net charge at the surface at potential of zero charge. So I'm not saying what you're saying is off either, but I had said, and there's a delay, so I think this is after what I had said, that it's not necessarily means that there's no charge. It means there's no net charge. So, so somehow what you're drawing could be that there's charge, but net going either direction is zero.
Yeah.
So something like that. I don't know.
So the charge on one side balances the charge on the other side.
So there's no net charge.
So there's no net charge here, but if we move the potential of the metal so that it's equal to the potential of the solution, then in principle, there's no potential difference, so it doesn't drive any charge from one side to the next. Like you could do that in principle. It's just that this is not a measurable quantity. Like no one knows how. Like you can't measure this guy independent. Actually, you can't really measure either of these guys independently from one another. You just have to. I think you have to use other techniques to maybe measure the charge. I think there are other techniques you can use to measure the charge. I don't know. But that's all I know. I haven't fully wrapped my head around like the potential of zero charge and how it relates to metal, stuff like that. So anyway, hopefully that was helpful. Both the Mott-Schottky and the potential of zero charge.
I think we will move on for now.
Yeah.
But
try to get to some of the other questions.
Yeah.
Some of these may have to get tailored to later. We'll see.
But we're doing a good job getting through the old ones. So
that's
add
true.
new ones.
We just had new ones.
Obson Julia says, guys, keep up good work. Congratulations. I want to know, is there any means to get personalized potentiostat to be used together with SPE functionalized by biological probe? I don't know precisely what you mean. Personalized potentiostat? Like, do you want your name engraved on it? Like, you could probably get like a laser engraver and put your name on it. That would be kind of cool.
Yeah. I think he's talking about biosensors, maybe. Like you're literally just trying to come up with a biosensor
handheld thing.
Yeah,
and
it's like a personalized thing.
SPE functionalized by. I mean, that is certainly possible. There are now smaller potentiostats available. Like we sell some, maybe not.
Maybe not like handheld, like a glucose meter.
Right. But like there are like Palm Sense, I think. Like there's Drop Sense, maybe not. They're owned by a different company. They're owned by Metro, maybe. But there are Palm Sense is the one that comes to mind. They sell very small portable potentiostats that are used for things like that.
Yeah, they OEM them actually.
Oh, do they?
So it's more of their whole business is. I think it's brilliant, but it's like everyone who wants to make a biosensor, and if you're talking about functionalized SPEs with a biological probe. That's a biosensor.
Yes.
So
That's just the name for
that's just the
biosensor.
name of it.
Yes.
So so they've created like software that makes it easy to like code, like, because what you're gonna do if you want to make a commercial like B2C biosensor is you're going to, you know, I'm sorry, when you functionalize your SPE,
Mhm.
I'm going to call it goop. It's stuff. You're going to put an enzyme, you're going to put an antibody, you
Yeah.
put something on the screen printed electrode. It's sensitive, it's uniquely sensitive for the thing that you're detecting, but it requires an electrochemical response. And you usually correlate typically a chronoamperometric signal. You measure the current. And depending on the applied voltage, you measure the current. Depending on the concentration of that species, you can correlate the concentration with a current value. And then, your device, you tell the person like, hey, put a swab of this on your SPE, stick it into the electrode, and then you can program it so that it's calibrated such that when someone pushes like a button, they get a specific when they get a value, it corresponds to a concentration, and it tells you if you have you know too much iron in your water, because
Mhm.
that's what the probe is measuring, is iron. So so PalmSense is the one that has those small portable potentiostats for that specific purpose. But if you are going that route for like commercialization, you might need to use like an electrical engineering, like have an electric, because you might not want a full on potentiostat. You might just need something that can apply like 1 volt, doesn't even need, and then measure as a current. It doesn't have to have like the advanced feedback loops and the current ranges and all the stuff, and the op amps and all this type of stuff that's normally in like a potentiostat. But that's the general, I'd say that's like kind of the gist of it. I'd look into them, although I've heard some stuff that they're like their SPEs are not as reliable, but
Interesting.
I don't know. Reproducibility is always very difficult in this type of field.
Yeah.
Um, he did have a second follow-up question. I think
Mhm.
we can talk about that while we're answering his
Sure.
question, which is, hello, kindly help to clarify and resolve this. What kind of sweeping to use on CV on testing SPE modified with thiolated group? It's a sulfur hydrogen. Which potential has oxidation continuously? Let's see. Dilated group. Which potential has oxidation continuously occurring? Um, let's see. So, what kind of sweeping? So, typically, so I'm assuming you have like maybe a gold thiol or some kind of metal where you're able to thiolate the surface. Typically, when you oxidize your apply, it depends a lot on the reference electrode you're using, the electrochemical system that you're using. But usually when you have a very high positive potential, you will start oxidizing whatever. It could be the solvent, it could be ripping off the thiolated group. You could be doing what's known as anodic stripping voltammetry. That's it. But potential has oxidation. You'd want to pick a pretty big CV sweep range, primarily in the positive potential region, and then look to see when the current starts to increase, a lot, and that'll kind of help you determine what potential to get continuous oxidation. But um, oxidation in CV, depending on your system, is also mass transport limiting. So if the molecule can't get to the surface because of diffusion, or because if it's just a monolayer on the surface and it comes off and that's it, you will not get continuous oxidation to occur. But so that's kind of, I guess, within the limited amount of time we have for all the questions, that's
Mm.
kind of my answer to this. But all sweeping in cyclic voltammetry is a linear sweep. You're ramping the potential linearly with time. So, Obson Julius, I hope that was helpful, both to your question about um, personalized potentiostats, screen printed electrodes, functionalization, as well as sweeping the potential to get a continuous oxidation current. So let us know if you have any questions on that. All right. Are you?
Yeah, there's a simulation question,
Yeah.
and just trying to
Yeah, that's
show thing here a bit.
yeah, it's from Fahad.
Yes.
So Fahad is asking how to calculate electron transfer rate constant KO of a redox on a modified electrode. So this is gold with a dithiol with some nanoparticles, I assume, on top of it from CV. What is best way to find KO by simulation software?
So yeah, it was just I'm not seeing the overlay on the, you know what I mean? I have
What
one
the
here trying to show the superimpose.
Let's just see. So is that exactly the same voltammogram?
Good question.
Because if it's exactly the same, you're not going to see.
It's not exactly the same.
Oh, it's not exactly okay. So you
No.
made an adjustment. So the
I
current,
believe so.
that's like 100 microamps, and then the voltammogram.
Yeah, what is the voltameter? It might be the same. That's the question. It's like 300. So let me make sure that that's not the same. Before I try to illustrate this one might be the same. But let me just change the value. You know, hopefully you'll see. I think it is actually the same. Yeah, I'm trying to. Yeah. I'm not changing it enough. It's probably the problem.
Yeah.
Let me just.
Well, I'll say tentatively speaking that I think it's very
yeah.
hard
There.
to
Okay.
find.
It was just behind.
It was just behind it. Okay.
Yeah, I'm trying to see if I can adjust this enough to get it to look. I'm trying to. I'll answer you in a second here to as an idea for illustrating this point is my my point here. Getting a different like rate constant or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll try to illustrate this a little bit for you in our software, for example. A lot of times this ends up being like a trial and error kind of thing. So I've just sort of made an assumption of a general kind of a thing. Let me first take this away just to, oh, not there. Sorry. This one.
We should also just mention this is our simulation software.
Yeah, as I'm jumping. This is our my company's simulation software. You can find it at aftermathlive.com. You can buy a license and play with it as well. But so first of all, I don't know what exactly your process you're studying is. I just made an assumption that you have an EC reaction, which means there's an electrochemical reaction as well as a chemical reaction. So I have this A with one electron goes to B. I have it as a particular E0 and a K. This is my rate constant. And then there's a chemical reaction that occurs, for example, with some forward and backward reaction K. I have diffusion coefficients of all the species, initial concentrations of all the species. I can adjust all these parameters, and then I can put my cyclic voltammetry parameters in here, and do my CV, whatever. I can just make up any parameters I want, and it will simulate what this looks like. Okay. Now, how do I figure out what my K is? In some sense, this can be a strategy of getting. What I did is I saved one result of this. So this is like this. Let's say this is your CV of your experiment, right? Of your whatever the thiol, or no, it's a gold something or other. Right.
Yeah, gold thiol. And then I think they have a nanoparticle attached to the thiol.
There might be more process. You might have
possibly.
You might have like EEC, there might be multiple peaks. So your specific example might be different. But what I can do, for example, is superimpose this plot and include it, come back to my simulation. And you'll see, for instance, that now I'm simulating over the faint plot. That's the one that I'm trying to match. And so the game in some ways is like adjusting my parameters of my simulated data to try to make it match my data. And so I can kind of play around with this and change my K and change my constants here, change my diffusion coefficient. Does that change anything? So not just K, but I can change other things. So that made it get much worse. So let's go back. these are all pretty standard numbers. I haven't changed a lot of them, but you can see that I can iterate back and forth, for instance, and say, okay, is this what number makes this, line up more closely? Right. And I'm just, I could make it kind of crazy numbers or crazy small numbers. Sometimes that helps you sort of see the extremes of what these tend to look like. And it's like, oh, that's really slow kinetically. Now it's like the peaks are separating like crazy. So if you had a really slow reaction, you could use this to like estimate what the rate constant is. And you can see as I start making it bigger based on that scan rate, the peaks start coming closer together. So anyway, all of this isn't necessarily to say what yours is and this particular one, but it's a case where in our simulation software you can do that kind of iteration and change the parameters. And for what it's worth, it's actually more like, because I did the same parameters to save the data, so this will line up pretty well. One of the parameters I changed, I can't remember what I changed. One of these, something like that. Doesn't matter. The point is, you would iterate on these until it, roughly looks like your data, and then that gives you, okay, well, whatever my parameters are here, that's roughly what these rate constants are. And so that's just kind of the way. Oh, it's because of the scan rate. That's all. Anyway, that should line up perfectly. So that's a way for you to kind of estimate those parameters with the simulation software. And it's sort of because there's so many parameters, you might find yourself having many to adjust, and it helps you kind of hone in on which what's the correct answer. So that's a kind of a powerful thing you can do with our software there, our simulation software.
Yeah, and certain things like the diffusion coefficient that you can determine experimentally, and the concentration that you know because you put it
or
in,
you look it up or whatever.
you only need to adjust the parameters that, like, okay, you don't have control over, but you can get it to fit a little bit. So that's another like strategy you can use.
Okay, here's a name I don't know how to pronounce.
Yeah, me neither.
I think it's some kind of a Eastern European language like Russian or Ukrainian or something. So in any case, could you please tell me about inductance in the impedance, how to plot? Excuse me. What model to use in ZView? Well, I don't have ZView. That's made by a different company. So I can't, of course, show you that specific software, but I can talk about inductance. So inductance shows up in one of two ways, usually, in impedance data. How to plot, what model to use. So inductance will show up most commonly at high frequency. So on your Nyquist plot, you might have something that looks like that. And so the inductance is this high frequency stuff that dips below the x-axis. And so the model that you would fit for this would be an inductor and then a leading resistor and then a Randall's element. So this would be how you might fit that resistor and then a Warburg. That's your Randall's element. Okay. And so that's the most common way that inductance shows up. This L right here is corresponding to that behavior, the high frequency. It's usually just from cable effects and things like that, which is why you can fit it. You can also neglect it. It's not all that important. Another way that inductance shows up is in what are called inductive loops, or in corrosion experiments, it shows up at low frequency. And so you'll get something that might look like this. You get this weird kind of thing where it dips below the x-axis as well, but it kind of curls. And instead of being over here at the high frequency, it's over here at the low frequency. And the model that typically describes this might have a leading resistor and then a resistor with an inductor, and a CPE. It's a 3-tiered kind of a circuit, and you'll get something that looks like this. And so this is often called just like a corrosion circuit, because a lot of times a corrosion process is what causes this. But this strange inductive part here, this L, is what leads to this little curl. And it's a bit of a strange feature and phenomenon, but that's the circuit that is used to describe this process here, or used to fit it, I should say. Describing it is a whole nother situation. It's a bit of a mess as to why it happens, and nobody is 100% sure. It's a bit weird, but in any case, those are some of the models, and that's where inductance shows up in impedance data, I guess. So,
Yeah. And I think lastly, before we close off, looks like we have a question from Barry.
yeah, good to see you again,
It
Barry.
was good to see Barry. How should I go about performing bulk electrolysis? Should I stir the solution using a large working electrode? Why do I need to separate the counter electrode from the working electrode and reference electrode? So yes, well, the reason why you separate that is because the counter electrode, if you're doing like a bulk electrolysis of an oxidation reaction, a reduction reaction has to be occurring on the counter electrode to maintain charge balance. So sometimes that counter electrode reaction might be reduction of protons to hydrogen gas. Hydrogen gas just bubbles away, and it doesn't, maybe you don't have a pH dependent reaction, so it doesn't matter, and you can have both electrodes next to each other. But more often is the case that something that happens at the counter electrode, these reactions may affect the working electrode. So it's typically the case that the counter electrode is in a separate chamber, still ionically conductive with the working and reference electrode, but we separate it just because of species that are being generated. And the working electrode area is typically pretty large. You stir the solution because you're usually mass transport limited. Only the molecules that get to the electrode surface undergo electron transfer. So that is why, like, if you didn't stir the solution and it was just stagnant, you'd have a diffusion layer and nothing would happen. You need to stir the solution to have fresh electrolyte, new solution to get close to the electrode surface to undergo that oxidation or reduction reaction that you're doing. So that's why that's what's typically done for bulk electrolysis experiments. So and then when you actually perform the experiment, there are two ways you can do. You hold the potential and just let it go for a long period of time. That's a really good way of making sure that you're only making the species that you're interested in. However, the rate at with which that reaction occurs may be limited. Or you can set it galvanostatically, where the potentiostat just sets a constant current. So the rate of the reaction is constant, but the potentiostat's going to do whatever it can to maintain that current. And so if your reaction is completed, it may start to eat away at electrolyte and solvent and stuff
or the
like
electrode
that.
itself,
Or the electrode itself,
which is the worst case scenario.
which is
Usually.
not good.
Yeah.
But people use both. And there are ways. They're actually I'll just show you this one very simple graph to kind of just demonstrate when you're doing bulk electrolysis in either situation, what you want to look for is this, which is that if this is time and this is let's just do potential normal, and this means that I is a constant. What typically happens is maybe there's a little bit of a creep up, but then it's like relatively flat. And then like it starts to go like up, like, oh, the potential starts going crazy to maintain I. This is where you need to cut the reaction off. It needs to stop because your reaction's completed. But similarly, if I did the same thing and let's say the potential was constant and I had a current, you'd observe the same type of phenomenon. Like maybe there's a little bit of a current that goes up, it's constant, and then the moment the current starts to spike up, then your reaction is done. So these are like indicators, if you will, that the reaction is fully completed. You really have electrolyzed all of your species. And one nice thing about this is just like the area under the curve is the number of it's the coulombs of charge. So this may be like 30 microcoulombs. You can then convert this with Faraday's constant to the number of moles. And then you can figure out your Faradaic efficiency. So yeah, that's it. That's bulk electrolysis in a nutshell.
Yes. All right, I think we're gonna call it here. We've answered every question, I think.
Yes.
Hopefully with wonderful clarity.
Yeah.
But
Yes.
if not, please join us next week. I think next week we should be back on regular schedule.
I think so.
at
Yeah,
least,
it should be Friday
from what I can
the 7th.
Yeah, exactly. From what I can tell at the moment, that should be the case. So thank you for joining us, everybody, a day early.
Yeah.
And we hope everybody has a great, I guess, rest of their week, because now there's still another whole work day, if you can believe it. A whole nother day.
Yes,
Friday.
a whole nother day. They have to finish this day and tomorrow.
The next day, unless you're in Japan or Australia, in which case you just have one day. Because it is already tomorrow.
Yeah, that's right. It's already tomorrow, but their workday hasn't completely finished.
It hasn't. Well, if it's 2 a.m. and their workday hasn't completed, that sounds like they have a tough job.
Well, I mean, completed for that's right. Their workday hopefully maybe hasn't started.
Hopefully
yet.
they're sleeping.
Hopefully they're sleeping.
But either way, this has been a very fun discussion about time, and we appreciate everybody joining us as always. And I hope everybody has a great rest of your day and week, and then weekend.
And weekend, yes.
Yes. And we'll see you next time.
Yeah.